Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple. Today we're going to be taking a look at Teotиуакан. This is a game from Daniel Tasini, one of my favorite designers. Did obviously Tzolk'in for you as enthusiast hobby gamers out there, but also did Voyages of Marco Polo.
Which is one of my favorite games.
Which is one of your favorites as well. This is a unique style of game. It's kind of an action selection, worker placement, pseudo-worker placement game, but it takes place on this giant rondel.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Actually, I can't say that I've seen anything exactly like this before. We've even struggled kind of to classify this because it is so unique.
What you're trying to do is build this ancient Mesoamerica temple in the center of the board. However, like any good Tasini game, this is a complete point salad. There's a variety of different ways to score victory points in this game. All right, let's talk about these components. Now, this is a prototype version. It's pretty close to being done. However, all the tiles aren't completed. Obviously, all the different components aren't 100% done. All right, so what you're seeing right now is the actual main board itself. The main board is broken into a number of different locations. Each of these locations is a different type of area that you'll be moving your workers around, and your workers are represented by the dice.
And what's really cool, and these locations aren't set in stone either.
Yeah.
You actually can add tiles to these locations and really change up the order that things come out.
Yeah, absolutely. So each of these different locations has these tile boards, meaning that you can swap locations, but as you add or introduce these tiles to them, you're going to be swapping the locations. And the great thing is that these workers only have an X number of spots to move, so you really have to kind of time how you're moving your workers, and this can throw that whole thing into flux.
Yeah, it changes the game every time you play.
Also, each of these different locations on these boards have tiles that can be adjusted as well. So as you introduce these boards, you can also introduce new goals or achievements that you're trying to complete, which again changes the dynamic of the game completely.
You can even change the end of game scoring tiles too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like everything in this game is variable. It's kind of crazy.
So as I said, there's a number of different locations around the outside of the board, and there's 8 of these. Each of these different areas are designated such as the palace or the stone quarry, which allow you to take actions in those very specific areas depending upon the dice that you have in there. In the center of the board, you have a number of different regions as well. In the very center, you have the temple, and this is the pyramid that players are going to be cooperatively building through the course of the game. On the left side, if you're familiar with Tzolk'in, this is the temple track. You're going to be ascending your discs, in this case cubes, up this temple track getting benefits, but also trying to get into the game victory points depending upon how high you ascend in each of these temples. And over on the right side of the board, you're going to have the Avenue of the Dead plus the solar calendar. The Avenue of the Dead is another one of those locations which you're trying to progress up to gain benefits through the course of the game, and the calendar is going to mark the round structure within the game. You're going to play this game over 3 specific rounds. At the end of each of these 3 rounds, you're going to score victory points. And within the calendar itself, you're going to have the Ascension Wheel. You're going to be ascending your dice or leveling up your pips. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but everyone's going to place one of their dice into this location with the 3 pips showing on it. All right, so that's the board itself. Let's talk about the actual other components that you're going to be grabbing through the course of the game.
Yeah, I mean, this is a resource management game for sure. So in addition to your dice and your workers, you're going to be collecting cacao or cocoa, as I think we call it here. You're going to be collecting cocoa, which powers your movement, powers your workers. It's actually probably the most important resource in the game,
right?
As well as your gold, stone, and wood, which again, you're going to grab those resources from certain action spots and then use them later. And since this is a rondel, you're moving in a circle. If you move past that resource spot, it's difficult to get back and get those resources again. So you really have to carefully manage those.
You're also going to have a number of temple tiles. You're going to start with some temple tiles already pre-built into the game randomly. Also, you're going to have a number of discovery tiles. These are placed face down off to the side of the board, and some of these discovery tiles will be placed into very specific locations which you can acquire and use at any time during your turn. You can acquire these and say, I want to use this right now, or save it up for a later turn.
Yeah, and this is also where the set collection aspect of the game comes in, because you're going to have masks mixed in with those discovery tiles that really, they can earn you a ton of points.
For you players that love Tzolk'in, there's also 4 of these starting tiles that would be dealt out to each one of the different players, and you're going to pick 2 of these. These are going to show what you are specifically starting with, either positioning on the temple, an X number of resources, even where you're going to place your workers in one of the 8 different tracks around the outside of the board. So it's up to you to kind of tailor the very beginning of your game by picking one of these or 2 of these specific tiles.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking earlier about the variability, and this is just another instance. You're not going to start even any 2 games the same, so your strategy is going to be different too every time.
So we have a 4-player game setup, as we said, and what we've done is we've already picked our 2 starting tiles, and we've placed all of our dice, our workers, around in these locations that show on the bottom of them. Now, you're not allowed to start with 2 dice in the same location, so you're going to have to spread them around right at the start of the game. Also, all of your dice are going to start as a level 1 unless something on your tile allows you to level up that particular dice at that point, or that worker at that point. So the game structure itself is actually really simple. As I said, you're going to play 3 rounds within the game, but within a round there are numerous different turns, and it's completely controlled by the players themselves. You're going to go around the board taking an action, and on that turn you're allowed to take one of 2 different main actions. One is to actually take one of your workers and move them up to 3 spots in a clockwise fashion. So you can take any one of your workers and go 1, 2, 3, or 1 or 1, 2, and drop that worker into that location. The other option you have on your turn, instead of moving one of your workers up to 3 spaces clockwise, you can simply pass and unlock all of your workers. Several of these locations around the board have locked locations with a key on them, meaning that when you place your worker on that tile, you can either take a main action, which we'll talk about in a moment, or you can lock your worker in and take a special action of that tile.
Yeah, one of the things I love about this game is your multi-use locations.
Yeah.
Because basically every time you go to a location, there's up to 3 things you can do, right?
Yeah.
You can take the action that's printed on the tile.
Yep.
You can lock your die in and worship and take a special action. Or you can just pass, basically, and collect more cocoa.
Yeah, so let's talk about each of those individually. First, let's talk about just collecting cocoa. You're going to need cocoa for just about anything that you do in this game. When you land your dice into a very specific location, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to count how many dice are in that before you get there. So if I want to use this guy and move him into this location, I can first, or let's say we go 1, 2 and move him into this location. I'm first going to count how many other players' dice are in this location. Unique. They can't be the same players. So in this case, I have 2, which means I'm going to collect 2 cocoa plus 1 just natively for the action. So you want to drop your workers into locations where there's a variety of other players there. You're going to collect that much cocoa and just simply put it into your bank.
Yeah, but the flip side of that is if you take the action, you have to actually pay that much cocoa as well. So you have to balance that really well.
Yeah, so let's talk about the second action that you can take. The second action is to worship. You're going to see locations around the board in very specific areas. So we have one here on the gold collection board, we have one over here on the stone collection board, we have one here in the palace, and we have one here and here where you can actually lock your workers into these locations. When you lock your worker into your location, the first thing you're going to notice is a top and a bottom to those areas on them. Now this is completely different from the main action of the board itself. When you look at this, you can either take the top or take the tile for free for simply taking that lot and locking your worker in. When you take the top action, that simply denotes that you're going to move up on that track within the temple, gaining the benefit of the location under it. So in this case, if the red player stopped here, they would get to move up 1 on the blue, which means they get any resource of their choice. And these are tracks you're going to be trying to ascend to gain numerous different abilities or resources throughout the course of the game.
And more variable tiles.
And more variable tiles. Anytime, it's a great point, anytime you get to any of these locations that have tiles, these are all face up. The first player to get to these is going to be able to search and take that onto their side of the board. Again, these are discovery tiles. Some of these discovery tiles do have resource costs too, so you will have to pay for some of them, some you won't have to pay for. The other option is you simply take the tile itself. In this case, pay 1 cocoa to gain 3 resources of my choice. Or you can take both of the actions by simply paying 1 extra cocoa. In that case, I'd get to move up blue, and the red player would also be able to collect this, paying a 2nd cocoa. You can also kick people out of these locations. So if the purple was in here, I could pay 1 cocoa to boot them, take 1 cocoa to take both actions, and pay 1 cocoa to get
So if you haven't noticed, we weren't kidding when we say that cocoa is an important resource.
It's incredibly
You're
important.
spending it all the time.
Yeah. The third action that you could possibly take is to actually take the action of the board itself. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, every action space on this board is different. But what's neat is you're going to power those abilities up based on how many dice you already have there. So once I move there once as a red die, I look and see the number of pips, kind of like in Marco Polo, so a little bit of cribbing the market from there, the number of pips and the number of dice, and you figure out exactly what you're going to get.
According to the lowest dice there,
According to the lowest dice. So if I bring in, you know, a dice that's a 3 and a 1, I'm still getting the 1 column, but the 2 row, which is better.
Yeah.
So you'll see you've 1, 2, or 3 dice, and a lot of these have that ability to come in with 1, 2, or 3 dice, and it makes your action better or cheaper or some variation. And then you're either leveling up 1 or 2 dice. So if I took this action, I could turn my 1 into a 2 or my 3 into a 4.
Yep. So anytime you see these locations on the board where it has these little wheels, that means you are allowed to level up one of your dice, and that's simply ticking up your dice. The other thing we need to make very clear is that anytime you take the action of the board itself, such as collecting gold or being able to collect wood or stone or the other locations we'll talk about as well, you have to pay cocoa equal to the number of other dice there from
other dice,
other
even
dice,
yourself.
even yourself.
So if you come in here, you have to pay the cocoa just to take that better action.
Yep. You do not have to pay for anyone who is locked to any of the warship spots. Leveling up the dice. Let's talk about how that works.
It's a really cool mechanic.
So the dice have numbers 1 through 6 on the pips. However, you'll only have dice numbered 1 through 5 anywhere on the board because once they hit level 6, they ascend. This is the cool portion. A couple different things happen when you ascend. One is when it clicks up to the 6, he is going to tick all the way back down to a 1 and be placed onto the palace board, the starting location. The second thing is you get to take one of the actions on the ascension wheel. There's 5 different actions you can take. One of them is to be able to gather a 4th dice or a 4th worker. That's great for being able to take those harder actions.
Or spread yourself out different spots on the board.
There's other ways to gain just flat out victory points, cocoa, move up tracks, or to pay 3 cocoa to move up 2 of the tracks. There's a variety of different things that you can do when you ascend on the wheel. The other thing that's going to happen whenever you ascend is this marker is going to move 1 step forward. This will naturally move forward at the end of the last player's turn on every round, so it's kind of the internal clock within the game.
Yeah, and I think this clock concept is really cool and very thematic. I mean, the culture was obsessed with like the solar patterns and the eclipses, and so it's cool because that's what signifies the end of the round, right? Is when the sun and the moon discs meet in the center.
Right. One of the final things we need to mention about the actual board itself, we mentioned the different locations that you can worship. There's going to be a point in the game, or several points in the game, when your workers are locked into a location, meaning that you can't move them out of those locations. You can spend your entire turn and lock all of your workers, simply taking them out of that lock location and putting them back into the main spot of that action board. Or you can spend 3 cocoa before your turn takes place to unlock all your workers. So you still get to take the action or take a turn that round.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that most of these actions on the board are pretty familiar to like resource management and spending resources, but there are a couple really unique things and really important things that happen on the board. And one of those is the build pyramid tile, right?
Yeah, the construct.
The construct tile, because you're going to be doing this a lot in the game. One of the alternate in-game conditions is actually building this pyramid in the center.
Yeah.
And every time you go there, you can pay a cost, take one of these pyramid tiles, and place it somewhere on this pyramid.
Yep.
You're going to gain victory points based on what level of the pyramid you're building, plus extra victory points for matching
Tiles
symbols.
underneath,
Yeah, so it's pretty important to do this. If you match a colored symbol, you actually also move up on the track. So they give you lots of incentive to building this temple.
Yep, and the temple can be built up to 4 layers high. Anytime you build the second level of the temple, it's got to be over 4 different tiles. So it has that natural progression of becoming smaller at the top. Then you have the decoration tiles, which also can be used.
Yeah, and these will go on the edges of the temples, and you kind of build it up the pyramid.
These have to be pointed towards the middle. So you're trying again to match icons that are underneath them to gain victory points and to be able to move up on that temple track as well. You're also gaining victory points for doing that, but it does cost 3 gold in order to build any of those decorations.
Yeah, and every time you add to the temple, either through decorations or tiles, you move up on the pyramid track here, which is going to score you points every round, right? So between that, moving up these tracks, moving up the City of the Dead track, there is a lot of things you have to pay attention to when it comes to scoring.
Yeah, let's talk very quickly about the Avenue of the Dead, or the city tile over here. You can also land on this location and pay 2 wood to be able to build the leftmost house. When you take that, you're simply going to place it into any one of these locations according to how many dice you have in there. This is going to be an end of the round scoring as well, and we'll talk about that right now. So you're just going to keep going around the board until the end of the round is triggered. That happens when this comes all the way down. Now, remember, this is going to move at the end of the last player's turn every round, and every time one of the dice is ascended. When that happens, you're going to play one more round around the table, and then you're going to have a scoring round. And there's a variety of different things that are going to happen during the scoring round. The first thing that happens is you're going to look at the temple itself and see how far each of these players has progressed on this track. Whoever is leading, they're going to get a flat-out 4 victory points. The second thing that happens is according to whatever round that you're in at that time. If it's the first round, it's a 4 multiplier. If it's the second round, it's a 3 multiplier. And if it's the third and final round, it's a 2 multiplier. You're going to multiply that number times how many steps they've made on that track. So in this case, purple is 6 spaces on this track. So it's 6 times 4, so 24 points. Everybody is then going to start all the way back at the very beginning once you calculate all those points.
Yeah, they really incentivize you to hit that pyramid early.
Yes.
Because it's much harder to build the pyramid in the early rounds, and so you're really rewarded for that.
The second thing that's going to happen is you're going to get victory points for progressing on the Avenue of the Dead. Now, depending on how many of these huts have been placed on this side of the board, you're going to look at the number that has been revealed here, times how far up you have progressed on this, so to speak, ladder. And that is 4 times 4 in this case, so that's another 16 points. This cool thing about this is that this track never moves back down. But the points that you get do progress slower. So as the avenue gets built through the course of the game, the residual points you're going to get less.
The balancing act there is really cool because every time you come here, you move up on that track, and every time you take your dice up to a 6, you move up on that track.
That's right.
But also, you have to keep taking those houses off the scoring. So if you race yourself up to the top of the track, you're also lowering the amount of multiplier that your points are worth. So you kind of have to find a good balance there.
The last thing you're going to score victory points are the masks. And this is the set collection portion of the game. You're going to score these every single round. They're going to stay in front of you. If you have 1 mask, it's simply worth 1 victory point every round. If you have 7 masks, it's worth 28 points every round.
Every round. And you don't lose those.
And you do not lose those either. Yeah, so you're going to be trying to collect masks at the various different locations through the course of the game as well.
I learned from experience that don't ignore that because it's a lot of points towards the end of the game.
So you're going to play that 3 rounds in a row until the very end of the game. Now, as we said, there's 2 ways the game can end, at the end of the 3rd round, or if the pyramid has its 4th structure built. As we mentioned throughout, there's a variety of different ways to score victory points. This is a complete point salad game. We'll get right into the review. I love point salad games.
Oh, yeah, I do too.
There's so many different ways to score points. You can score points from building the pyramid. You can score victory points from doing discovery tiles. You can score victory points from the Avenue of the Dead. You can score victory points from just about everything, even the tracks here, these locations. You'll see these icons for victory points just about everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, literally almost everything you do in this game can earn you victory points, which is cool because there isn't really one strategy, I think, that is completely dominant. You're going to get a lot of points for building your pyramids early. You're going to get a lot of points for building the City of the Dead early. You're going to get a lot of points later in the game for collecting your masks. So you kind of want to switch up your strategies a little bit, try to maximize those points every round, which is a complete puzzle, trying to maximize those points. I mean, there's a lot of math that you can apply to this game, and that's fun. I know for a lot of people, trying to math out where you're going to get those most points is a lot of fun. And I'm one of those people. Yeah. I'm just not as good at it as you are, for sure.
Well, I mean, this is the kind of game that speaks to me. I love variability in games. I like a game that I can play 6 times and still not see all the different variables within it. And that's just on this base game. By playing this base game, you are actually adjusting your strategy according to what other players are doing and what the dice they have in those locations. Because everything that you do feeds into the cocoa. You have to have those resources. If you don't have those resources, you're going to be stuck wasting turns collecting resources when you want to take advantage of specific actions and locations, and you can't because you don't have the cocoa to power those things. I love that about it.
You have to plan ahead.
You have to plan ahead in this game. Also, I love the workers. Like, the workers are such a simple concept by using the dice themselves. Now, some people will be like, that's not a worker placement game. It is kind of a worker placement game. By you using this rondelle, you are using these workers in very specific locations, and you are limited by their movement. You can't just traverse the entire board anytime you wish. You are limited to moving 3 spots, meaning that you are planning 2-3 turns in advance to be able to have workers land in very specific locations at very specific times to gain the benefits of these specific locations.
Yeah, I mean, it's super unique, and I've never seen anything quite like this, or been faced with a puzzle quite like this, because if you want to activate the highest abilities, you have to have all 3 dice there. But if you have all 3 dice there, and then it turns out, oh, I need wood, then you have to spend 2 turns just getting one of those dice over to the wood. Whereas if you spread out all of your dice across the board, you can kind of trigger those abilities exactly when you need them.
Yeah.
So you have to decide which of those things you're going to do. It's not always an easy decision.
Well, it's a great decision too, because when you look at the what you get to collect for these specific locations, let's just look at gold here, for example. If you have a 1 die in here, even for the 1 location, even if your lowest is a 1, they're pretty crappy rewards. But if you look at the highest, by getting 4s and 5s and 3 of them in there, 2 advancements on here, getting the resources from those advancements plus 4 gold is huge. All of these have giant benefits if you're able to do those very specific dice combinations in the locations.
I mean, you have to time when you do those,
Yep.
and you have to time when you ascend, because every time you take one of these actions, you have to tick up a die.
Yes.
So if you move your 5 somewhere without thinking about it, it ticks up to a 6, goes back to a 1, and returns to the palace.
Yeah.
If you weren't prepared for that to happen right then, that might kind of mess up your strategy for the rest of the round.
Yeah. The only con I'll say, and this is my only con for this game, is the fact that your first time playing, and once you play the game a couple times, you'll recognize this. The mask strategy is very powerful.
It's
if
super
you are
powerful.
able to collect masks early in the game, you're going to be collecting a large number of victory points. Masks do have a cost. Most of these have a resource cost. You do have to have your dice in locations at specific times. They usually require you to advance on these or to be able to lock your dice into locations. So they are going to take time in order to acquire, but if you're the only player at the table acquiring these and you're gaining 20, 25 points every single round, it's going to be hard for other players to catch up. If you make everyone aware of that at the start of the game, I think it will level the playing field
I think
significantly.
more than just specifically the masks, all of these strategies have a time and place to use them.
Yes.
Right, like you need to slowly be collecting masks. And I mentioned it earlier, but the pyramid, if you hit that hard and fast early, you can get 24 points in the first round from that. But then the last round, to even get 20 points, you have to make it all the way to the top of that track.
Yeah.
So like, there's very much diminishing returns from the pyramid, from the City of the Dead. And so you really, like the first time you play this game, that's very difficult to understand that the strategy you're using the first round is not going to work so well the second round. You're actually encouraged to change your strategy halfway through the game, which usually that penalizes you, right? Like if you don't fully commit to something, but you kind of want to do a little bit of everything here.
Plus the variability in this game. As we said, the variability comes in not only who you're playing with at the table, because where the dice are located is extremely important, but also the way that the discovery tiles come out, the locations that they come out to, how the pyramid is built, which pyramid decorations come out, and then all of these different boards that are going to be placed in the numerous different locations, not to mention the tiles that can go over those boards to change in-game scoring, to change all of these different things that you see here within the palace. There's just a ton of variability in this game, even the way that you start the game.
And I love that. I love these starting tiles. I love building this pyramid. I mean, this game does a lot of things I love. Like I said, Marco Polo is one of my favorite games. Tzolk'in is one of my favorite games. This is right there with them. I mean, I need to play this a few more times to see if it unseats Marco Polo for me. But I love that it takes some of my favorite things about Marco Polo and just adds other layers on top of that.
I think this will be huge. I believe it's releasing in Essen. It's a fantastic game from Ticini. If you guys like Tzolk'in, if you guys like Marco Polo, this is a no-brainer for enthusiast gamers.
Oh, absolutely.
It's actually pretty easy to learn for non-enthusiast gamers as well. So that is Teotиуакан from NSKN. It plays 1 to 4 player. It does have a solo mode if you guys are interested. If you guys have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, everything else that we do, and we will catch you guys next time.